Welcome back for another episode. On today's episode, we have Justin Smith, Director of Construction at Greystar, also Principal at Real Equity. How's it going, man?
It's going good. How are you doing?
Doing well. Glad to get to talk to you again. I really enjoyed our first talk, so I'm excited for this episode. Before we talk, and our big topic for today is this idea of wealth management in the AEC industry. I'd
Mhm.
love to know a little bit about you. Who are you? What's some of your background? Kind of how have you gotten into this part of the industry, and really, what do you do?
Yeah, no. Hey, well, thanks for having me on. First and foremost, I do appreciate taking out this time. And I love the title, the AEC Disruptors.
Oh
It
yeah, man.
sounds,
Thanks.
it sounds like the third leg of a Transformer movie. So that's kind
It
of
could
cool.
be.
It
Hopefully
definitely-
it's before it goes for too long.
exactly. Before it goes for too long, we're like the anti-Megatron. So, but myself, I was really born into this, and I say that sort of truthfully because I've always enjoyed sort of the building, the construction, and the creation of things, right? The creation of building elements, right? Whether it's, whether it was a fence in my backyard or whether it was some Play-Doh creatures or whether it was some house out of Legos. Shout out to that last guest you had that was on Lego. But it's really been this concept that if you can dream it and you can think it and you can design it and you can draw it, you can build it, right? And so, I just live by that. Was fascinated by buildings, fascinated by things happening in the community and how communities evolve. Went to school for it, did drafting like in high school, went to, thought I wanted to be an architect, went to school for architecture, and then went into construction management, then eventually evolved into this concept of how do you build a city block. And that was also fascinating. So I went into, sort of real estate finance, real estate investment, and then many of the pieces and parts associated with that. So it's just been, sort of a, odd enough, it's been a labor of love, and I do enjoy what I do.
I like the shout out for Legos. Personally myself, I've been spending a lot of time building Lincoln logs. I have 2-year-old daughters, so we've been building a lot of Lincoln log houses. So
There
I
you
do
go.
appreciate the appreciate the reference.
There you
I
go.
gotta
You
find
gotta
someone.
keep
Maybe there's a guest that does things with Lincoln logs. I don't know.
right.
But yeah, so no, I'm excited to have you. And when you reached out, it was a topic that we hadn't really approached on the podcast to the point. And it's this idea of really wealth management within the AEC space.
Mhm.
And before we kind of dive into what that entails for you specifically, tell me a little bit about one, for you, what is wealth management? And then why have you kind of found yourself in this position where this is a topic you're passionate about?
You know, it really dawned on me one day where someone, and it was at a company. So sort of in your early years, you get out of school, and two things that come to mind really is, hey, how can I make money, and how can I, or how can I do a great job and sort of build my career, right? I mean, that's what many of us, particularly in the what I call the ABCD space, in profession is known as sort of the AEC space, and we'll get into that. But really, you want to build your career, right? You may want to make a little money, you may want to get out of student loans, but you're trying to really build your career. And one of the things that you hear sort of over and over is really have this work-life balance, right? I mean, and that's something that so you're building your career, and then many professionals around you saying, hey, have this work-life balance, make sure that you work well, build your career, and then life and da-da-da. And it's somewhere in sort of my journey to build a career, to make some money, to build wealth and that type of thing. I start to realize it's really not about work-life balance. I think it's about live-life balance, right? And work and career is sort of along for the journey. Yes, it may be what you do, but it's not who you are, right? So this concept of sort of live-life balance is something that I subscribe to now. Working is part of that. Being passionate about your work is part of that. And we have this industry that that is on sometimes it's on a longer continuum if you're on longer projects, but oftentimes, they may be 12-month projects or 4-month projects and things like that. And so, your career is almost like, a mini economy. It's up and down, right? Depending on the projects that you're working on. So you really need to subscribe, I think, in the AEC corridor to a live life balance.
I like that. So you mentioned this idea of ABCDs, and I think it'll kind of transcend some of this conversation, but what do you mean by that?
So ABCDs is sort of simple. Architects, builders, consultants, designers, engineers, and you can throw in a fortuitous T, which is technologists, right? But these are all the creatives. These are the folks that, create our internet, create our downtowns, our city halls, our roads, our bridges, our houses, our neighborhoods, our community. These are the folks that are, building and designing and ensuring that freeways don't fall over and roads stay built or potholes get filled, right? But many times, what you see is most of these folks are, while they're building the world for us, they don't always take care of themselves. They don't always think about, okay, what's beyond the 401k or what's beyond this particular project that I'm on. And we've all been on timelines where it's like eight months, we got to get this building out of the ground, right? But we don't often think about that long-term picture. And frankly, we don't always think about, do we have equity in that particular project? And are we able to benefit from that project like the owners are, right? Do we have a stake in it? Do we have equity in it? And so that concept of speaking to the ABCDs is something I like to do, right? Because I'm part of that group. I understand that group and I know what we're going through. And I know that we can get sort of on this track of sort of building projects or building, our career, but often our own wealth management, our own wealth building, our own equity building takes a back seat, and we don't realize it till it's too late. So or at least where you have to do some catch up and that type of thing. But nevertheless, I want to put some energy towards having that conversation with people. Hey, have you thought about buying a house? Have you thought about buying a second house? Have you thought about self-directed IRAs? Have you thought about alternative investments? Have you thought about syndications? Have you thought about investing in multifamily real estate? And really opening people's eyes and concepts up to that, to those ideas.
So your background kind of started in architecture. I mean, how did you find yourself, representing a company like Real Equity and really wanting to have conversations with these professionals about wealth management?
Well, because Real Equity was really born out of, hey, I wanted to buy single family houses. I wanted to buy small duplexes and multiplexes and 6 and 10 units and that type of thing. And I was actually doing that, right here in the Bay Area. And so that's what really got me started on that. And then it morphed into sort of private equity and looking at, the expense and cost variables in certain locations, and moving it to much larger properties in other locations, and then bringing in co-investors and partners and joint venture persons to do those type of deals. So that was a sort of morph, and it was simply just born out of, hey, I'd like to have cash flow investment properties.
Do you see yourself, or as you have these conversations and as we're talking to those members of the industry, are there various strategies that we can apply to this idea of wealth management within our AEC space? Obviously there are things we could do outside of that space where we could invest in certain stock market thing, we could buy our own real estate. But do you talk to, or do you see people really focusing on, I'm an architect working on a project, how can I get involved from a financial standpoint of that project?
Yeah. there are certain opportunities where you might work with a particular project. You might have a relationship with the owner, and you might talk to him. Hey, I see we're doing this big project. I know you're in the middle of a capital raise. How might I be able to get involved? Maybe I have a four, not a four, a self-directed 401, or maybe I might have some 1031 exchange money, or maybe I just have, some inherited funds or what have you, and I want to invest in this project. And I'm working on it. So it's something that you're familiar with. You're vested in it from the perspective of, getting it designed or making it happen. And maybe there's an opportunity for you to also get involved into it. So that's one way, is just, asking, the specific stakeholders of that project, hey, how do I get involved? A second arena is, if you are an architect, maybe finding a small project in your neighborhood. Some people start with an ADU in their backyard. Like, I happen to be in California, and people are, and laws and some rules have changed such that people can turn their house, go from single family to a duplex. So maybe there's an opportunity for you to do that and build some value or create some value in your own dwelling, or look at the place across the street. Maybe it's a vacant land or lot, and you as an architect or you as an engineer might know how to deal with that circumstance and get it entitled, or get it designed and get it built, and partner with someone to bring in the capital, or you might have the capital yourself. So there's many ways that you can sort of take what and sort of take that to the next level to build, to create an opportunity for yourself.
I guess there's even opportunities if, I'm an architect working on a project, my investment may simply be the fee, the design fee or commission that I would have originally charged.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there may be opportunities when we go to set out for a project, instead of asking that owner to pay me, whatever it is, 1%,
Yep.
1.5% design fee, it's like, keep that, but that's going to go back into that project for an investment. I mean, do you see even that as an opportunity for investing in the work we do?
Oh, for sure. And that's open to a lot of different consultants and different folks that work on projects. For example, whether you are, let's say you're a surveyor, and you have to survey some particular large plot of land, and that is actually, a main piece of the project, or you work in utilities or something, and that landowner needs that, and it may be particularly expensive. You might say, hey, well, I'll do those services, or I'll do those pieces and parts of the project, and I'll leave my fee in the project. Mm-hmm. So that you become either a limited partner, or depending on the level of service, you could be a general partner, right? And really not only adding capital or investment or equity to the project, you're adding value to the project, because that person has the benefit of somebody with the knowledge that can help them along the way. So there's different. So if you really think outside the box, there are really different opportunities for you to sort of not only be vested in terms of professionally, but also, have a capital stake and even have a service stake, and just leave your fee or your cost or what have you in the project. And you'll see that might add up in the early days, that exponentially sort of increases over time.
Because I would think it all sounds great. It makes sense that I would invest in the things that I do or build, so I can get something outside of just my 9 to 5. But obviously people are going to be met with, well, how do I get started? Or I don't have the funds. Yeah. I mean, are there ways around, you've mentioned syndication, that's one thing I want to know about, but are there ways around that? Like, how does somebody even get started if they don't just readily have those funds?
There are different ways you could do it. I will say, if you are looking to be a LP in a let's say a multifamily syndication deal, and I've done a number of those, bringing those deals to market, or to friends and family investors. You actually can use your own IRAs. You actually you can use even your 401k. You can use what they call self-directed IRAs, or self-directed 401ks, where you can roll those institutional dollars to a self-directed institutional organization, and then be able to have check writing power over that. So, and I've done that before, and I've known others to do it. And if someone really wants to get into the detail of that, reach out to me, because I can help them and lead them down that path. But essentially, you're finding your own money. In most institutional places, and I won't name some of the bigger banks and retirement institutions, your money's locked up for 59 years or till you're 59 or what have you. And then you retire, and then, you have access to that money and that type of thing. Well, there are institutions that allow you to have check writing ability for those dollars, right? So that's one particular way. Inheritances, that many people get. Sometimes, some folks usually their own equity in their house, or in other, other properties they may have. Another thing, folks do is pool dollars together. So maybe there's several members of your family, or several in your book club or what have you, and you guys might pool dollars together to invest in a particular piece of property, or to invest in, let's say, a multifamily syndication. And when that does well and that starts to take off, and then there's a capital outlay, then you can roll that forward into another deal and that type of thing. So you get really creative. There are a number of ways you can sort of find dollars to do, to invest in certain types of things.
And that's just going to expand. I mean, I'm going to be, I get to be, I guess you could say, I get to be on a panel in a couple of weeks where we talk about the metaverse and its impact on construction. What that is, I have no clue. But, through the research, one thing that keeps popping up, which is interesting, is this idea of NFTs. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with NFTs, but for those that aren't, non-fungible tokens, but using NFTs to buy partial ownership or fractional ownership of real estate. And it's an interesting thought. And in fact, I mean, there are companies out there that do similar things. There's a company, I think, called Fundrise, where you could buy it's basically crowdsourced investing, where you could buy parts and pieces of a real estate property, and you get some kickback in return. So it does seem like, one, there's a lot of opportunities if you're creative, or if nothing else, know who to ask. And then with things like NFTs, it's going to expand even further into this idea of fractional ownership.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the sky's going to be the limit on that, because there's such newness to it, right? I've even heard of the tokenization of real estate. So for certain project, it's you buy a fractional share of it through buying a token of some sort, and I'm no expert at that at all. But a lot of those things are out there, right? Another point I forgot to mention earlier is sort of crowdfunding. And that kind of goes with the sort of book club idea. But you'd be surprised, like someone could have, 10, 15, $25,000 and invest, into a crowdfunding opportunity, or invest into a, multifamily syndication, or to a storage, storage units, or what do you call it? Mobile home parks and things like that. And the vehicle that some set up is sort of crowdfunding vehicles, syndications, or it might just be a joint venture. So, but getting back to the idea of the NFTs and the tokenization of real estate, man, that's just going to take off, and really be something to watch for if you're really into that.
That research is nuts. I mean, even talking about, we're talking about land. And I mean, there are people that are buying land in the metaverse. So there's multiple versions of the metaverse, but buying land is a speculative investment that one day somebody's going to need this. And I mean, I saw that, Snoop Dogg is building his house in the metaverse, and somebody spent like 400 grand. Yeah, I know. Somebody spent 400 grand to like have land next to him, which sounds really stupid. But then like the argument is like, oh, well, one day Snoop Dogg's going to do a free concert and you might be able to own the land right up against it and charge people, So they're discussing this way of how can this virtual land
Mhm.
be used to create reoccurring income, just like regular land. And it's mind blowing to even think
That's
about.
amazing, and that concept in itself, and I really, I haven't delved into it, but the fact that you can buy sort of virtual land, you know, it boggles the mind. I mean, the thought that comes to mind for me is, why wouldn't somebody just create another virtual piece of land and then slap that right next door to it? So, but don't get me to speaking on something that I have no idea about, but I do find it fascinating. So, um, you know, let me know what comes out of that conference.
I know. I'll be so overwhelmed by the
Yeah.
people in the panel, but okay. So let's get back on track a little bit. Although I mean, it is relative or relevant because we're talking about ownership of land and
Yeah.
property. But
Yeah.
you mentioned this thing, and I've kind of looked on your Instagram. You have this idea of like note from future self.
Yep. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that, and what is the message we're really trying to convey to those in the industry?
Really, and it's sort of along the same lines that I was mentioning earlier about ABCDs and taking care of yourself, right? Um, yes, you have to take care of your industry, your job, and you want to, do that. But you also need to, along the way, look at that piece, look at that investment. We're so sort of patterned to putting money in our 401k and just kind of letting it ride out because we know that we can't do anything with it, until, years in the future. But my concept is, okay, if you're part of the ABCDs, then and if you were to go back and sort of the ghost of Christmas past concept, but your future chef will go back to you and say, hey, what did you do for me in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s or whatever that allows me to take advantage of alternate real estate, to take advantage of building wealth, to take advantage of sort of the boom of real estate, the advantages of tax depreciation, of depreciation, of cost segregation, of tax benefits, and some of those things that might help me, sort of shield some of my capital gains and that type of thing. What did you do for me that really helped that? And so, for those of us that are in these career professions, that's why I sort of tackle the ABCDs that, we might get on a project for 18 months or 4 months, like I mentioned earlier. Are you at the same time thinking about allowing that time, allowing your money to also work as hard as you do and be invested in something else? And so that after 8 months of a project or 2 years on a project, you sell that piece of property and now the value's gone up, right?
Mhm.
So that's really, talking back to your future self, talking back to your current self, saying, hey, look after us, look after your family, take advantage of time, and maximizing your investment now so that in the future you'll be better off.
I mean, you'll hear, or I don't know who said it. Maybe it was Warren Buffett, but this
Mhm.
idea of if your money, one, has to be making money for you, and effectively you need to be making money when you sleep.
That's right. Right.
If you're not doing these type of investments, I mean, I've gone as far as, how can you use an HSA and invest those funds when they're not just sitting there for future insurance claims? What's interesting is these conversations, I mean, maybe they happen, but I remember a couple years ago, I went with my wife we went to Georgia. We both graduated from Georgia Tech, and they were doing some sort of alumni
Mhm.
session. And the individual that was there was talking kind of similar to this concept, but it was not geared towards the AEC industry. It was just in general.
Mhm.
But what I thought about was that we had to step outside of our industry to even have these type of conversations
Mhm.
that were not
Mhm.
related to us specifically. I mean, we talked about things that we made sense, but it's interesting that in our education, whether it's for architecture school or even within our architecture firms, these conversations, they just don't seem to happen a whole lot.
Yep. Yep. No, you're right about that. And so I mean, it kind of goes out of, I don't know if you recently heard, like Florida is mandating that, I think it's the high school curriculum. Everyone has, some form of financial education, gets out of this concept of, sort of the, hey, when I was young, no one ever told me about credit management. When I was young, nobody ever told me how to, manage my account, or financial management, or even financial awareness, right?
Hmm.
And so we don't get that. We don't typically get that when we're young. And then the other thing is, if you're I don't somewhat siloed, in a particular profession, let's say you're a computer programmer, or a software programmer, or an accountant, or a structural engineer, right? You're so focused on that particular craft or that trade and doing well with that you don't have those conversations about financial awareness, and many of those folks, hey, want to start a business, and that's when it really comes up. It's like, oh my god, hold on a second, I need to
Yeah.
understand cost management, I need to understand accrual based accounting, I need to understand cash flow accounting and things like that. So it's really having those conversations as you go, to really open yourself up to both sides of that you know
It's an interesting challenge for a lot of, say, employers within the industry, because I know internally we've had conversations from a learning and development perspective
Mhm.
about how do we expose our team and our employees to different topics.
Yep.
You mentioned we're so focused on, our company does a lot of software type training. So we're so focused on making sure you understand how to use the product that you're going to
Correct.
model with, and companies will pay thousands of dollars for that. But what they don't offer internally a lot is any of these conversations. I mean, there are CFOs and financial folks within that firm that have a lot of this knowledge. One challenge is, how do we take those individuals and how do we put on internal seminars that talk just about wealth management, or just about, whatever it is, and not so focused on this idea of, you know, our product or whatever our specialty is.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head, and in some respects, the leaderships of our companies are so focused on sort of getting the job done, right? And there's some discussion about, there's like the emotional intelligence and working with others, and self-improvement, self-awareness, and so, but it's all in vain of working with that particular entity, and it can be very insular, right? But you're right, thinking outside of, okay, well, what happens if we all know that employment is at will employment, right? So what happens after that? What happens if this company doesn't do well? What if it does do well? What if you do have a windfall, and your company goes public? What else do you do? So I that's where it gets back to what I was mentioning earlier about live life balance, right? And kind of looking at things, from a holistic perspective. And unfortunately, if it's not going to be at your place of employment where that conversation is going to happen, well, then let's have it let's have it at meetups. Let's have it at networking event. Look at do it at your book club, do it at your tea club, but do it at the weekend with your buddies. And several buddies of mine, we actually go out, and we do these empowerment hikes, where, quite frankly, it's very tiring because we just find a hill and or a mountain, and we just walk the mountain. But we do talk about self-awareness. We talk about supporting each other. We talk about things that might be happening for us personally, things that might be happening with our marriages, with our kids, and those type of things. Talk about business, but really just to kind of support each other, and just be there for each other. We don't get to do it all the time because everyone's super busy, but it is about sort of connecting, and engaging with others. No phone, no phones, or no texting and this type of thing, but really just kind of folks just getting together, and a group of guys just kind of getting together, and letting your veil down in terms of sort of the roles and responsibilities you might have in life, and just kind of talk to each other and try to support each other.
I saw one of those, maybe this one you had your phone, but I was kind of looking at your Instagram right before
Yeah.
we came on, and it reminded me of, you mentioned you do a lot of these construction tip Tuesday things.
Yep.
it seems like I mean, your career to this point, you've really been able to touch a lot of a project from the beginning to the end.
Mhm.
What inspired you to kind of do this Construction Tip Tuesday, and really, who's the audience that you're trying to reach with that?
That was born out of, everyone seems to suggest that, development is so easy. And you get a lot of gurus and a lot of folks out there, sort of, hey, real estate is easy, development is easy, you can get out, you can make lots of money and that type of thing. And I do agree that you can, right? But along that journey of development, along that journey of real estate, and that, because that's what I know, that's why I live and breathe, there are little nuances that I feel might help people out. And so it was just really born out of, how can I, within a minute and a half, give someone a tidbit, a feature, or some insight into what they can do to help them, get into real estate, get into development, that type of thing. Because, yes, everyone says, oh, you can make lots of money and do this, but at the same time, there's a lot of different things that you need to understand, and so one of my first really talked about scope, budget, and schedule, because those are probably the three highest and most important things that you need to understand as you go into a particular development deal. And each one, and so each one is some nuance of that, right? Whether I'm talking about dealing with, landscaping, whether I'm talking about dealing with flooring materials, whether I'm talking about, dealing with electrical outlets and cabling and those type of things. Those are all nuances as part of this whole development and construction environment. And I just want to have a little fun and share knowledge with folks, so they can see, hey, look, there's a little more to it. But you can also have fun with it. And, for those that are listening or interested, and they reach out and they say, hey, you know what? I want to know more about X topics. How can you help me with that? I might have a consultant, I might have a vendor, I might have an architect, I might have someone that has some knowledge about that, or I might even have knowledge about that, and I can share that resource. I mean, I believe in sharing the wealth. I believe in everyone getting their share, getting their piece, and getting real equity. And I want to help in spreading that knowledge. So it's really just about just sharing my ideas and sharing the things that I've done.
I think it's awesome. I mean, because as you said, we all hear that a lot of people make money in real estate, and that's where
Yeah.
a lot of the wealth is. And kind of why we wanted to start this conversation is the idea. Sometimes it seems very overwhelming as, how do I get started? Or I don't
Yeah.
have the funds, or that's for everyone else. So there's too much to understand. So having those resources available, even if it's just small tidbits, or even being exposed to this idea that there are people out there that are getting involved with the projects that they're working on to build equity past, that the end date of that project, are kind of inspiring, because I don't know if a lot of people realize that's happening.
Yeah, and that's true. And some people, like you say, don't know where and how to get, how to get things started, right? How do I go from, dirt to keys, right? I mean, I've gone from dirt to keys on 7 different projects in the last 10 years, all successfully, all on budget, on time, and on scope, right? But how do you do that?
Mhm.
And where do you do that, right? So in my travels, and I've done that in 4 to 5 different states, still working in different projects in different places, and it's also different, and it can be very nuanced, right? And so I just want to be able to share that knowledge and let people know, hey, yes, you can get out there and do it. It's not necessarily as easy as the guru might say, but it is definitely achievable. But here are some things that along your way, you should definitely consider.
I mean, I find myself thinking about it all the time. I mean, my wife and I, during this huge housing boom that we're all in,
Mhm.
we constantly get those. We want to buy your home for cash. We want to do that,
Right,
and we've thought
right.
about even things of, hey, what if we rent our home? And this is something we've talked about. Let's rent our home. Oh, that sounds great. Okay, well, where do the funds come for the next home? All of those things. Like we're so programmed in a way to you get a house, it appreciates a little bit, you sell it, you use all that money and you put it on another house, and you just keep working that way. Or the same thing with like a car. Everyone's just used to, I get a car, I have a car payment in 5 years, I
Yep.
get another car, I have a car payment. I'm just used to doing that. But it is one of those things that sometimes you feel like, well, we can't get started because we don't have X, Y, and Z, or somebody
Mhm.
else
Mhm.
has the luxury to do that. So I mean, I think it's a really cool topic, and that's why I was excited to talk about it, because I said it's not something that we hear about a lot in our industry.
You're right, and quite frankly, people need to kind of bring it down. Everyone says, "Oh man, skyscrapers, I can't do that," that may be true. There are some challenges to doing, trying to do a 14-story tower, because I did a 14-story tower, in Hawaii, and that had its inherent challenges. Um, Most definitely, right? I mean, that's not for the novice, but maybe you can build your own duplex from the ground up, and that type of thing, and that really you'll experience a lot of the different pieces and parts along that development journey. um so that will sort of teach you, and it's really about just kind of getting started. So I have different people that I either consult with, or clients, or what have you, that come to me and say, hey, I have a plot of land. I want to put something on it. What do I do? And I can either coach them through the process. I can help them get their plans, help them get it built. Whatever they see fit, and really try to work with them on that opportunity.
You mentioned, kind of as we wrap up, you mentioned last time this idea of build it or buy it, and
Mm-hmm,
there's different
mm-hmm,
strategies that go with each one of those.
mm-hmm.
What are some of those strategies that you sort of use yourself, or you tell people about, that if somebody says like, oh, that was a cool podcast, I'm ready to get started, but I don't
Yep.
know how the heck to get started. Tell me a little bit about these strategies for building it or buying it.
Well, there's a couple of things, and that's something that it, it there it really depends on, like, what you have, the your risk versus reward. Let's talk about that first, right? Because if you want to build like a 3-story house, or I'm sorry, a triplex, right? You want to build a triplex, but and you start off from the ground up. Well, you might have to go through either buying the land, if you or entitlements and approvals and regulations and developments and laws and codes and construction, labor, material, and all those type of things, right? Or you can go out and find a triplex somewhere, renovate it and fix it up. So, and then the where you do that becomes a part of that. Do you do that in, let's say, Texas? Do you do that in Arkansas? Do you do that in Oklahoma? Do you do it in Phoenix? Do you do it right in your backyard? If you, let's say, you live in Virginia or live in Colorado, right? So really, the concept of build versus buy is, how much risk do you want to take and how much reward do you want to have, right? If you go out and you acquire a 10 unit or 15 or 50 unit building, you don't have to go through all of those processes. I just outlined the entitlement, approval, and all that process. You can just buy it. Now your return on that might be a little bit different, because all of that's already done, right? So you may get I don't know, depending on you and how much money you put in your financial variables, but let's say in a syndication deal, or multifamily deal that I've done, you might have anywhere between a 7 and 9% cash on cash return, and you hold it for 5-10 years or whatever, and have a nice IRR at the end of that, or return on that whole investment, right? In the double digits, upper 18s, right? Or you build it from scratch, same area, and you may have a greater return, but you have a lot of different things you've gone through, and a lot of risks along the way. So this concept of build versus buy is something that I take a look at in my own personal strategy, in the real equity strategy, in terms of, okay, where is the opportunity and what type of opportunity is it? Is it a new construction opportunity, or is it an acquisition opportunity? And what's the returns on both? And and my investors' appetite to move in one direction or the other, and the returns that are so associated with one or the other. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I would guess there are, maybe this, I mean, there's always a risk, right? Because if I'm buying it, there's some unknown risk of what am I buying, and what is the quality of what I'm buying. If I open up that wall and all of a sudden I see that I got to replace X, Y, and Z that I never knew. So it does seem, when we talk about this idea of a strategy for build versus buy, I would think you need a really good team of people
That's
to
right.
help you assess property and and make those decisions, so that you're not kind of getting into, hey, I'm going to renovate our house. My wife and I, our first home, this is our first home, the one I'm in, for like a split second, we went into just a total dump. We're like, oh, we could renovate this. And we've actually done a lot of that to our home now, but we're like, oh, we could renovate this. It would have been the worst mistake ever. Like, it was our first home. We would have never done a renovation before. We would have not wanted to live there while we were doing it. But there were obvious problems, but sometimes those problems aren't obvious. So I would think that you got to make sure you have a good team when we're looking to buy, so that we can do that due diligence.
That's right. And I think, and it's interesting, the concept of team, because you're right. Whether you're building or you're buying, you do need to understand the power of team, and you do need to have your team. Now, I'll say on the build it side of the fence, there are a lot more team players that you do need to rely on. And there's key information along that pathway that you might need to rely on, like geotechnical reports, environmental reports, or waterproofing, or an architect, or the contractor, or the window installer, or your carpet installer, or the person that's doing your concrete foundation. All these different little pieces, and folks might have 1%, 2%, 3%, four small parts of the entire project, but there's a lot along that team continuum that you need to rely on the build side, versus on the buy side. It may be a smaller set of team. It could be your financial team. It could be you, the contractor, a realtor, and your title company, and that's it, right? And you may play multiple hats. You may have your contractor, your realtor play multiple hats, and boom, you can get into it and get it done. So I do think there's a lot more technicality on the build side than it is on the buy side, and it might be a little bit easier to ascertain, and that might be a good place for people to start, particularly if you want to start fast, get in, start with cash flow, and then work your way into sort of the acquisition. I mean, into the new construction, repair, or renovation side of things.
Well, we can only barely get into the topic. Obviously, you have so much more you could share. Before we go, if somebody wanted to reach out, how can they get a hold of you, or how can they find you?
Yeah, a couple of ways. The website is probably the easiest, RealEquity.com. That's the logo here over my left shoulder. That's all right.
They mirror it, man. Sometimes it's hard to tell.
Exactly. Where is my bloody shoulder? Or just send me an email at info@realequity.com, or call me directly, 510-991-2770. But yeah, if folks have ideas or concepts, or just want to know, hey, how can I get started? Maybe I want to get started in investing, right? And ride alongside of some of the projects that I'm doing. And hey, feel free to reach out for sure.
You might be the first to give their phone number on the show, so well done. But Justin, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. I do appreciate it, sir. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, I'll stop the recording.